A friend from Mexico. A friend from Mexico.
A friend is coming to visit. A friend is coming to visit. A friend of yours? A friend of yours? Do we have time for coffee first? Do we have time for coffee first? Do you want to go to the store with me? Do you want to go to the store with me? Do you want to take the subway? Do you want to take the subway? Do you want to walk there with me? Do you want to walk there with me? First. First.
For my friends in Mexico. For my friends in Mexico. For my son. For my son. For 1 year. For 1 year. For 10 years. For 10 years. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need anything. Her husband is coming to visit too. Her husband is coming to visit too. He's Colombian. He's Colombian. He's lived here for 2 years. He's lived here for 2 years. He's lived here. He's lived here. His wife has lived here for 1 year. His wife has lived here for 1 year.
His wife is from Mexico. His wife is from Mexico.
His wife's name is Maria. His wife's name is Maria. How late are the stores open? How late are the stores open? How late? How late? How long has she lived here? How long has she lived here?
I don't know her. I don't know her.
I don't think you know her. I don't think you know her. I go there. I go there. I have to buy a few things. I have to buy a few things.
I have to go to a department store. I have to go to a department store. I often go there. I often go there. I often go to the garden cafe. I often go to the garden cafe. I often take the subway. I often take the subway. I often walk. I often walk. I want to buy a few things. I want to buy a few things. It's more expensive, but it's faster. It's more expensive, but it's faster. I'd like to go with you. I'd like to go with you. I'd like to have something to drink first. I'd like to have something to drink first. My colleague lives there. My colleague lives there. My wife needs the car. My wife needs the car. Not today. Not today. Of course I would. Of course I would. Of course. Of course. Often. Often. She arrived later. She arrived later. She's lived here for 1 year. She's lived here for 1 year. She's lived here. She's lived here.
She's lived in Mexico for 10 years. She's lived in Mexico for 10 years.
She's lived in Mexico. She's lived in Mexico.
Sometimes I go to Washington. Sometimes I go to Washington.
Sometimes I take the subway. Sometimes I take the subway.
Sometimes they're open until 10 o'clock. Sometimes they're open until 10 o'clock. Subway. Subway. Taxis are too expensive and I like to walk. Taxis are too expensive and I like to walk. The older one doesn't need anything. The older one doesn't need anything. The subway is fast. The subway is fast. They arrived last night. They arrived last night. They both live in Washington, D.C. They both live in Washington, D.C. They both speak English very well. They both speak English very well. They both want to see New York. They both want to see New York. They have to go to Boston. They have to go to Boston.
They live here in the city? They live here in the city?
They live in the United States now. They live in the United States now.
They want to see New York first. They want to see New York first.
They're both from Mexico. They're both from Mexico. They've both lived here for 2 years. They've both lived here for 2 years.
They've lived here for 1 year. They've lived here for 1 year. Today I'd like to walk. Today I'd like to walk. Today they're open until 6 o'clock. Today they're open until 6 o'clock. Until 10 o'clock. Until 10 o'clock. Until. Until.
We can go together. We can go together. We can have a glass of wine. We can have a glass of wine.
We can take the subway. We can take the subway. We can walk or take a taxi. We can walk or take a taxi. We can walk there. We can walk there.
We have a lot of time. We have a lot of time.
We have time if we take a taxi. We have time if we take a taxi. What's your friend's name? What's your friend's name? When did they arrive in the United States? When did they arrive in the United States?
Why don't we take a taxi? Why don't we take a taxi?
Why don't you take a taxi? Why don't you take a taxi? Would you like to have something to drink first? Would you like to have something to drink first? Yes, of course. Yes, of course. You're going to walk. You're going to walk.